All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We're just going to take a few minutes, so just please be patient and we'll get started in a few. Hi, everybody. Welcome, whoever who's joining. Good evening. Just letting you all know, we'll be taking about 2 more minutes, waiting for some more people to come in, and then we'll just get started. All right, hello everybody, good evening. Welcome to our webinar discussing UNICEF for 2021. If you don't know me already, my name is Justin. I'm a part of the National Council. I will be your moderator for the webinar this evening. Just a few key reminders before we start. At the bottom of your screen or wherever it is on your phone, there is a Q&A button where you guys are able to submit questions. You'll also be able to check which questions are answered live throughout this webinar, which questions have already been answered, and if our team is adding any comments to your questions in writing behind the scenes. You also have a chat function that you guys will be able to send messages to our panelists and ask any technical questions. Our team will also be sharing some links and important reminders as the conversation progresses in this webinar. So be on the lookout throughout the chat throughout the evening. And just know that if you want a question answered by Anucha, you need to make sure to send it through the Q&A function rather than the chat. Otherwise, it won't go through to her and she won't answer it. But regardless, anyways, make sure, today is a great opportunity to ask any questions to Anucha. So don't be shy, send them away. I'm sure she's happy to answer them. So I think we'll get started now. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming Ms. Anucha Browne, our Chief Engagement Advocacy and Global Programs Officer at UNICEF USA. Just some stuff about Anucha. She was an All-American athlete playing basketball at Northeastern University for 4 years. She was also the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Business Operations for the New York Knicks, as well as the NCAA's Vice President of Women's Basketball Championships. And now she's here at UNICEF USA as a part of our Chief Engagement team. We're happy to have her, and without further ado, Anucha, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Justin. And so I'm gonna correct you. So I went to Northwestern. I'm gonna hold that because Northeastern, Northwestern, there's a little bit of a rivalry there, but I graduated from Northwestern. But thanks so much for introducing me, Justin. Appreciate you. I'm so grateful. And just grateful for everybody that's joined the webinar. First and foremost, I just want to wish everybody a happy Hanukkah. For those who celebrate Hanukkah, it's your first night, and if you're spending it with me, I'm just grateful. So I will start there. Just really happy to be in front of you and looking forward to some Q&A. I really think like this year, our Unite community really persevered in some unprecedented times and that are still ongoing. UNICEF USA focused its energy to address this extraordinary impact that COVID has had on mental health and psychosocial needs for vulnerable children and youth within the continental United States and the Caribbean by forging some strategic partnerships with leading academic institutions as well as some community-based organizations with deep roots in helping communities that are most impacted. And more specifically, we are, for the very first time, UNICEF USA is working with tribal communities in the Southwest, particularly in Arizona with the Navajo Nation and the White Mountain Apache, and doing some mental health interventions. And for the very first time, we're working in inner city Brooklyn with the Arthur Ashe Institute of Urban Health, again, rooted in mental health. And we'll continue that work. And our 17 Unite teams across the country were able to successfully really transform very quickly on the fly from in-person events to digital events. And they were able to come together and continue to advocate and fundraise and build community and speak out on behalf of children everywhere. And we're incredibly proud of them. And as the schools transition from in-person to virtual to hybrid and back and forth, thousands of our UNICEF club leaders and members really continue to lead the charge in speaking out on what matters through our election and registering their peers to vote. We hosted online fundraisers for Trick or Treat and virtual meetings to stay in touch and build communities. And we took thousands of advocacy actions. And our Uniters supported their local communities through encouraging local healthcare staff, through thank you cards and creating masks and virtual tutorings. And through the challenges of 2020, our Unite community continued to thrive. And I'm incredibly proud of you all. And with your help, we've also had many advocacy successes this year, from helping pass laws to end child marriage in Pennsylvania and Minnesota to mobilizing more than 3,000 supporters to vote for every child in the presidential election. And what's more, Uniters hosted 64 virtual meetings with their senators and representatives during the August congressional recess to support our top global priorities, global advocacy priorities, and the Global Child Thrive Act. And that's a bill promoting early childhood development through the US Foreign Assistance Program. So thank you for your activism. And thanks to your activism, Congress is working to pass all of these by the end of this year at the 116th session that ends at the end of this year. And together, we've accomplished so much for every child, both here and abroad, and we won't stop. And so we're looking ahead to a new year, and we'll be working just as hard on government policies and funding support for the work that UNICEF does around the world. And one issue we'll be advocating for is the increased investment in mental health and psychosocial support for children in the US and around the world. And mental health is one of UNICEF's top 4 global advocacy priorities in this coming year. Globally, mental health is being challenged like never before, especially when you consider how how COVID has impacted young people. And even prior to the pandemic, 1 in 5 of the world's children and adolescents experience some type of mental health condition. And so we urge you to call your Congress and prioritize the issue now. So you can text the words mental health, one word, mental health, to 52886. And there's still so much more work to be done, and we won't stop. And for that reason, we're taking Advocacy Day virtual this year, and we're expanding it to take place over the course of an entire week from March 22nd to March 26th. So you got to mark your calendars. And we'll have a full week of activism with congressional meetings over Zoom, opening and closing ceremonies, and evening programming. So mark your calendars and stay tuned for the registration that will be live in January. And additionally, we have so much important transformational work that we're going to be doing together to build a world that upholds the rights of children everywhere so that every child can thrive. And we're aligning our strategic vision with our new CEO's strategic vision that is being built to realize the rights of realize child rights here in this country as we do abroad. And so in doing so, we're going to fully embrace UNICEF's role as the only UN organization mandated to advocate for the protection of children's rights. And as with all of UNICEF's work around the world, our engagement and advocacy work will also be more explicitly rooted in the UN Convention of the Rights of the Children, the CRC. The UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, the CRC. That's the world's most ratified international human rights treaty. And it sets out and demands accountability for civil, political, and economic, and social and cultural rights for every child, regardless of race, religion, or ability. And there's been no systematic effort in the United States to build a groundswell for our support for child rights. And to do this effectively, we really need to be thoughtful and strategic, and we'll be developing a multi-year strategy to advance a child rights agenda here in the United States. And so we're relying on you as uniters to be those frontline advocates as our greatest assets to help lead this charge. And it's rooted in educating the American public on what child rights is and what it means to you. And one of the things I'll say there is, just imagine, I really think the message here should be, imagine that young people and children here in the United States are the only people in the world that do not have rights. The Convention of the Rights of the Child, the CRC, is ratified in every country across the world except in the United States. And so learning from UNICEF's experiences around the world, we know that some of the greatest and most sustainable change in support of child rights happens at the local level. And it happens by engaging children and young people themselves as key stakeholders and working alongside decision makers to identify the solutions. And that brings me to another key success this year. UNICEF USA's launch of the Child Friendly Cities Initiative, CFCI, in the United States. And CFCI is a UNICEF global initiative that uses the CRC, the Convention of the Rights of the Child, as the framework to help local governments prioritize the needs of children and young people and elevate their voices in the entire governance process and decision-making process. And so today, We have Houston, Texas, Johnson City, Tennessee. We have Minneapolis, Minnesota, Prince George County, Maryland, and San Francisco. They've partnered with UNICEF as a first cohort of cities to implement this ambitious 2-year process toward recognition as a UNICEF CFCI city or county. And in pursuit of this recognition, our pilot cities will conduct a situation analysis to really assess child well-being in those communities. And based on their findings, they're going to implement an action plan that prioritizes the best interests of children and youth in their local policies. And so in the coming months, we'll be working hard to integrate CFCI and child rights agenda more fully into the UNICEF UNITE structure. So stay tuned for more developments there. And in the meantime, you can act right now in support of the Child Friendly Cities Initiative by urging your mayor to put children first in your city. So text CFCI to 52886, and this will take you to the CFCI Action Center with city-specific activations for those who live in our CFCI pilot cities, as well as activations to reach other mayors across the country. I love the CFCI framework because at its foundation, it enables young people to be agents for change in their own communities. So now, I want to do some Q&A. And I want to learn about some of the issues that you care about. And so I think we should start by doing a poll, right? I actually want to know what's keeping you all up at night. You know, what is it that's keeping you up at night? What matters to you the most? So we're going to launch a poll, and we're going to ask for your thoughts and for you to provide us with your choices on what are the things that you care the most about and that are keeping you up at night. Let's start there. The poll is active now. So we have vaccines, access to quality education, ending child trafficking, racial inequities, migration, mental health, gender equity, ending violence, climate change, ending child marriage. All right, do we know what we have?
I think that,
So it looks like, access to quality education. I really think the learning crisis has been exacerbated because as a result of COVID, right? We've an entire generation of young people are out of school. Over 1 billion children across the globe are seeing the effects of having to go virtual. Everybody doesn't have access to technology to learn virtually. So I think you all are spot on. Looks like coming in second is, what do we have? Coming in second looks like racial inequalities. Yeah, and it's it's something that I think is top of mind to many young people. Let's see, third, ending violence. Absolutely, ending violence against children, and that's something that UNICEF is doing work on across the globe. And all of these issues are rooted in child rights. Right? And so as we begin to educate the American public on child rights, all of this is going to become crystal clear. A child has a right to equity. A child has a right to living in a safe environment, a clean environment, one that is not ravaged because of climate change, right? A child has a right to health care, including mental health. A child carries their rights with them regardless of what border they cross. So migration is an issue, right? Or a child doesn't lose their rights just because they crossed over into the United States. So all of these are, I think you all are spot on. So I think now we're going to go to Q&A.
yeah. Yeah, I think that poll highlighted some of the stuff that we really need to prioritize as we're heading into the next year. Yeah, as you're saying, we'll dive into the Q&A. We have some uniters across the country who have some questions prepared to ask you. So we'll start with Maureen.
Hi, Anucha. How can UNICEF Uniters promote child rights on behalf of UNICEF USA in the next year?
That's a great question, and as I said, we're mobilizing. It's the it's nice to know that our uniters are focused, but everything that you've been doing to date is rooted in child rights. So all of your advocacy work that's about supporting children thriving, not only surviving, but thriving in their own environments. And so whether that it is the fight for our migrant population to have rights on our border when they cross into the United States, whether it's education equity or access to vaccines or ending violence or ending child marriage, all of those are rooted in child rights. The work that you're doing on a daily basis and your involvement in UNICEF Unite, it means that you are standing up for rights for every child here in the United States and around the globe. So keep doing your work. We're going to continue to do this. I think, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to start to see some transformation in our Unite strategy, so that we are more specifically and more directly educating the American public on the ground. We need you to invite your friends into this network. We need more uniters spread across the United States so that we're doing this work and we're seeing a sea change.
All right, thank you, Anucha and Maureen. Hui, why don't you take it away with your question?
Hi, Anucha. My question is, what is your vision for growing the number of Unite teams across the US?
Oh, that's a great question. So as you're all aware that UNICEF Unite is a volunteer organizing model, and it really is rooting in making sure that you all have agency in your own communities to grow Unite. And so much of this is really about you all taking your networks into account and building out this Unite infrastructure across the United States. And that's in areas that are not necessarily CFCI cities. It's the advocacy work is on the ground in every city across the United States. And that is the North Star, right? We want to build a groundswell of child rights actors all over the United States. And the expectation is, as we begin to educate the American public on child rights, there's going to be a demand over time for us to address the rights of children here in this country. And we hope there's enough groundswell that we'll see a ratification of the CRC at some point. That's our North Star. It's not our primary focus. Our primary focus is really rooted in educating the American public and beginning to root this in our everyday language. We don't necessarily talk about child rights. We talk about child well-being, but we need to have a rights-specific language embedded in all that we do.
Thank you, Hui and Anucha, for those insightful thoughts. Ethan?
Okay. So my question is, what is UNICEF doing about climate change globally? How is UNICEF USA working to promote the rights of children to be protected from climate change at home and abroad?
That's a great question. Since I got here 3 years ago, I walked in the door and we had massive weather emergencies across the southern tier of the United States. We had Category 5 hurricane hit Houston. We also we saw the same Category 5 hurricane hit Puerto Rico, and so those are weather-related emergencies. And we saw the pickup of hurricanes this year. I mean, we are steeped in the impacts of climate change. But UNICEF across the globe has been doing work to mitigate the impacts of climate all over the globe with WASH programs. But we're also working behind the scenes with governments to get them to enable policies that are rooted in addressing climate change specifically. And over time, we expect that those policies we continue to work with policymakers, because those helping them understand that children are bearing the largest brunt of climate change is really important. A couple of just some data points, right? Nearly 90% of those who fall ill due to climate change are children under 5. And by 2040, an estimated 25 million more children will be malnourished due to climate change. 600 million will live in areas that have extremely limited water resources. So the work that we're doing to work with governments across the world is rooted in changing policy and getting them to understand what they need to do to mitigate climate change in their own areas.
All right. Thank you, Anucha. Thank you, Ethan. Jennifer, you're up next.
Hi, Anucha.
Hi.
So my question is, how can we get more involved in state-based advocacy? Has UNICEF USA partnered with organizations or coalitions on state advocacy in the best interest of children? And do you have any plans to expand that work?
Sure, that's good. Thank you for those 20 different questions. I'm only kidding. No, I would say that, you know, we have absolutely been involved with advocacy at the state level. Probably the hallmark, one of the hallmark advocacy issues that we are addressing is that of ending child marriage. And as I mentioned, the work that we've done has led to ending child marriage in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. We're working exclusively in New York to see if we can end child marriage. And that, you know, obviously it's a problem that this is not mandated across the United States, but we are working state by state, and we're working with a coalition to actually get that work done. And as we build out a strategy for child rights in this country, we want to be seen as the premier thought leader on child rights. And that means we're going to have to lead a coalition on child rights. And so that is our work moving forward. And all of those things are rooted in state-based advocacy. You know, many people, I would say, you know, many of our people have more confidence at the local government level than they do at the federal level right now. And that's actually a positive, because the change that we want to see is happening at the state policy level. So it's really important that you all engage in that process. So more to come there, but we'll continue to work as hard as we can. And if you have an interest in getting involved in this work, I invite you to go to our Action Center. It's advocacy.unicef.org. Okay, next question.
Thank you, Anucha. Thank you, Jennifer. Just to let you guys know, we will be taking questions from the Q&A box. After, I believe we have one more from Mona. You want to take it away there?
Awesome. Yeah. So I have 2 questions. Anucha, can you please talk about your future plans to end child marriage? And also, I know that child marriage is a topic that I and like a lot of people are really passionate about. And I was wondering, how can youth in particular, I guess, activate locally for this issue, especially if they might not live in what's considered a priority state?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So as you know, I mentioned before, we're looking to pass legislation to end child marriage in New York, and other states have strong bills pending in the state legislature. But you don't necessarily have to live in a state to advocate to end child marriage. And so, you know, one of the partnerships that we have with Zonta International, we launched an advocacy action in which you can email or tweet out your state legislator, letting them know that you support ending child marriage under the age of 18 with 0 exceptions. So regardless of your home state, you can go to act.unicefusa.org/child marriage or text the word marriage to 52886 to take action. Remember, you don't have to live in the state to do state-based advocacy. You have the right to advocate across states.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Anucha. Thank you to all our Uniters who presented the questions today. We have a lot of questions in the chat, so just keep them coming. I'm sure Anucha is happy to answer all of them.
Of course.
Yeah. First question comes from, oh wait, I don't know who this is, but how do you recommend for teens to get involved and make change with UNICEF? I want to help with mental health for children in other countries, but I'm not sure how to start.
Oh, well, we invite you to become a uniter. You know, we need to build this network. of Uniters across the United States. And so the advocacy work we do within Unite is not just for state-based advocacy, not local advocacy, it's really global advocacy as well as the work that we're doing here. You know, just the efforts to change the lives of our most vulnerable children across the globe is the work that that you're rooted in. And so we invite you to become a UNICEF Uniter. We also invite you to join our clubs, right? We have a pretty strong club infrastructure at the high school level as well as the college level. Join one of our clubs.
Heck yeah, we have the best. We have the best club structure. Let's see, from Jyoti, I am a new UNICEF Uniter. How can I start with advocacy for children in NYC?
Well, it starts with what you want to be involved in, right? I think, as I said before, we're going through a transformation over the next year. And much of your work is going to be rooted in building out and teaching the American public about child rights. And that starts with making sure that we train you so you fully understand what child rights is and UNICEF's mission across the globe that's rooted in child rights. And so I would say to you that if you're a Uniter, you need to be really excited, because I would say fasten your seatbelt. We've got a fantastic year ahead of us. And, if anything, it's exciting because you all are going to be at the foundation of getting our country to ratify the CRC over time. It starts one community at a time. So think about that. And I would say, as you're joining UNICEF Unite, bring in your network. You have a sphere of influence. You have friends. Bring them into this network. It's a lot more fun when you bring in people you know and you're familiar with into the network.
Very, very true. From Christina, what is your advice for young professionals looking to work in development, and how can we strive to be in a role like yours?
Well, it's interesting because everybody's career has kind of like peaks and valleys, and I didn't necessarily come to UNICEF in the more traditional route through development or through human rights. I actually came to UNICEF through sport. And so it really, when you think about career development, I would say begin to network with people who you have an interest in following their career path, right? And get to know them. And so I always say networking isn't about getting your next job. Networking is about building your own skills and building that your allies throughout your career. And it can start as young as you need it to start. But it's about, when you're young, get to know as many different opportunities as possible. If you have interest in development, the work that you do as a Uniter, a current Uniter, is about fundraising, and it's about advocacy, and it's about building community. And we always want to teach young people about the power of philanthropy, because in the end, we need resources to support the work that we do across the globe. But we also need you all to continue to work on your advocacy, because that, when you think about sustainable change, it's happening at the local government level. It's happening when you build policies that are put in place with children in mind. You're going to land in the right place. And so there's a lot of opportunity within the construct of UNICEF Unite for you to build and for you to develop your career.
All right. Let's see, the next question. Do you have any recommendations for things that clubs could be doing virtually to fill the club requirements for advocacy and community building events?
There are probably so many things you can do. I would say, when we think about advocacy, right, there's a lot that's we're seeing change, right? We're going to have a change in administration. We're going to continue to have advocacy goals next year. I invite you to be as involved as possible in that. We're not necessarily going to have our clubs that are, heavily focused in fundraising. We want to build an army of people that are interested in pushing forward a child rights agenda in the United States. So I want you to think about that. Right now, you have at the cusp of really building a strategic plan to root child rights in this country. And so that's that's something you should be proud of. There's a lot of opportunity in that, and I encourage you to get involved. There's a lot of education that we have already online that can help you understand what the child rights agenda looks like, how it's been employed in other countries, examples of children who have grown up in a rights respecting environment. I always use this example that Lisa gave me, and it's of Malala. Early in her upbringing, when she was 10 years old, she learned how to have conversations across the table and voice her concerns in a constructive manner. So when we say Malala today, Malala didn't just become Malala. She became Malala because she was raised in a rights respecting environment. And we have an opportunity to do that here in the United States.
Yeah. Piggybacking off of the last question, actually, do you mind sharing what are UNICEF's 4 global advocacy priorities for 2021?
Sure. So our global advocacy priorities for 21 is first vaccines. Obviously, this pandemic has really set many of our UNICEF programs back. And so the importance of getting vaccines out there is huge. And UNICEF has done that around the world. And we have the systems and the logistics in place to carry that out. So vaccines is a top priority. Mental health amongst young people is a priority for us. Education, making sure that our young people and our children get back to school is a major priority for us. And then climate change continues to be a major priority for us. Those are 4 global advocacy priorities moving forward. But that doesn't mean that we're doing an about face on the current things that we're advocating for. Migration and children uprooted, children moving across the globe, that continues to be something that we're going to weigh in on and work on. We're also going to be working to end violence against children. It's the work that we do across the globe. So while we have 4 main advocacy priorities that are global, vaccines, education, mental health, climate, there's still a number of other things that we will continue to do. We talked about ending child marriage, right? It might not be a global advocacy priority, but we're going to continue to root that out in the United States. Global Child Thrive we're going to continue to work on things that are focused on child survival and children's ability to thrive.
Great, thank you. From another one of our attendees, they said, I think child rights on immigration can be such a tough topic. How can we ensure these children aren't being trafficked and help children stay in healthy condition once in the US?
Yeah, and that's work that we've been doing for a while. And it's important work. Most of our, when we think about where you really start to see sustainable change is change in policies and talking to your local representatives and making them make sure that they know what their constituents think is important, right? And so when we have those congressional congressional recess meetings, it's important to have voice around these issues that matter to you. Migration is something that we're going to continue to lean in on. And we continue to work behind the scenes and provide technical assistance to try and influence policy, but also ensure that children are protected regardless of what border they cross, and making sure that they're protected if they're in custody, which is like an oxymoron, children in custody. But having dialogue and making sure that we have voice around those issues will continue to do.
Awesome. From Alagu, what role does the private sector play in furthering UNICEF's mission? How can I/my employer help, especially with Genu and Youth 2030 strategies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have been engaged with corporate on business for results. And what that's rooted in is when you think about a large corporation and their sphere of influence to impact the lives of children, whether it's working with a retailer on their supply chain to ensure that children are protected. We just more recently working with potential World Cup cities to ensure that they align with a child rights scorecard to ensure that young people, young children and youngsters are protected in large mega sporting events. So when you think about each corporation's sphere of influence and how they can use their influence to impact the lives of children in their communities and outside their communities, that's really where the crux of it comes.
We have a question I feel is going to be very applicable here. As a new upcoming uniter, what is some advice during such an uncertain time to continue to help and aid this organization and children? Also, what are some of your main visions and goals for 2021?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, you know, we're inside, like, I don't know about you, but I'm happy to see 2020 go, except I became a grandmother in 2020. So there was a light, and there's so many shining lights about 2020, right? If anything, it really has, it's forced us to kind of reset and think about what we're grateful for, right? We're grateful for our health. We're grateful for our parents. Many of us haven't had a chance to see our parents. We've been separated. And so it's taught us many lessons, right? It's also taught us the importance of, it's also highlighted some very clear inequities, right? Inequities in access to education, access to healthcare. And so those are things that we have to think about as we move forward. So, you know, while COVID has torn apart many of our lives, it's also highlighted things that we could rally behind and change in our own communities. And so I invite you all to do that. I'm glass half full. As we're ending 2020, I want you all to think about what we're grateful for and what you can do to change the world as a uniter.
We have a short, but I think a really fun question from Juliana. How do you get a community to start a movement?
Well, you know what? It's interesting because, you know, movements, I don't believe movements are organized. I think they're organic, right? So you think about what is the it, you know, what is that unique thing that galvanizes people to speak up and speak out. And so you think about what that is in your community, and that's, you know, that's what we saw with climate, right? We've seen now young people across the globe marching against climate. You see young people across the globe demanding racial equity, right? We've seen young people across the globe, particularly in the United States, marching against violence, right? And now you're seeing an intersection of those millions of young people. And so if anything, I'll tell you that people are listening to young people. People are listening to the voices of young people. It's no longer kids are in this place where they're seen or not heard. And so I encourage you all to find your voice, lift your voice, and allow Unite to channel your voice in a child rights focus.
Tagging along with that from another member in the audience, as a club leader, I am sometimes unsure how to encourage participation in our UNICEF club. How should we make people more eager to help with the club in normal years and this virtual year?
You know, I think you need to meet people where they are, right? They're people, when you join a club, we assume that you're joining the club because you are in service to child rights all over the world, right? And they care about UNICEF's mission. And so find out what individuals are interested, what brings them, what's unique about them that brings them, what's their life experience that brought them to UNICEF, and what are they interested in? And think about how you might channel that energy into service for child rights.
Yeah, I think totally agree with that advice. As a club leader myself, I feel like getting kids engaged is like one of the hardest parts, but totally resonate with that advice. From Andrea, what is UNICEF doing to get vaccines distributed all around the world?
Oh, wow. That's a, you know, that's a fully loaded question. So we have stockpiled 500 million syringes. We're working with WHO and we're working with Gavi from this vaccine distribution standpoint. We are probably the world's, you know, we're the world's largest procurer of vaccines, And so we've been doing this work for many, many years. And we're going to employ those strengths as we distribute vaccines and make sure that those vaccines are reaching the world's most vulnerable children. Would anybody else like to answer or add to that from my team?
Does everybody here are you familiar with COVAX, which is the consortium that's really kind of the United States is not part of COVAX, but it is the entity that is helping to organize the global response. And as Anucha said, UNICEF is responsible for 92 countries that are middle to low income countries. It's the biggest undertaking of its kind in modern history to be able to respond to all of these countries simultaneously, right? And the only organization that can do it is UNICEF, because it does have this network of, and because it is already, a robust and mature network in which we have cold chain, and you've probably heard that in the news a little bit here. Even in the US, there's some of the vaccines require deep cold chain, which is even a step further than the normal cold chain. And in developing countries in particular, cold chain can be tricky because power, electricity is not always an option. And so UNICEF has, with your help, with everyone's help, because it's not just that we've been doing it solo. I like to say that there are volunteers here, like you guys, who make the work possible and help us to buy the vaccines and help us to raise the awareness we need. And guess what? On the other side, there are volunteers, a lot of women especially, who maybe never even got an education, but they're working as community health workers and volunteers. And those are the people who are going to stop this pandemic. Those are the people who stopped Ebola. They go out into the community, they're trusted, and they're going to help us administer these vaccines. So when I say UNICEF is the only entity that could do this, it's not hyperbole. It's that because of its presence in all of these countries, and because of its expertise and the trust that it has within communities, the scale, the largest humanitarian warehouse in the entire world, and the supply expertise. I mean, all of that and the purchase powers combined that made us the selection for this, epic epic undertaking. But I really wanted to emphasize that it starts with us. I mean, we would have, field workers and volunteers would have nothing to, it's not just doses of the vaccine, it's also the transportation of that, the cold chain, it's, training those volunteers, it's mapping out the strategy, it's identifying who's most vulnerable in a community to get those vaccines. As you know, we're going to have to stage them so that healthcare workers and folks who are more vulnerable than others so it's not just going to be like a mass immunization drive, which is something we typically might undertake. This is a little more nuanced and whatnot, but it's a massive undertaking. And I want to just echo what Anucha said. Everyone should feel really proud of this, because you don't just, if the UNICEF didn't exist and have this expertise, I don't know what would happen, but it's only because it's been nurtured and funded and allowed to, occupy this space in the world, that now it's time for us to give the world something back, beyond children. This is really primarily going to be adults.
I could add one thing to that.
Yes,
just
please.
one very quick thing. I was on a call this morning with UNICEF people and with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which finance a ton of vaccines, and they're going to be helping a lot with the COVAX and the COVID vaccines. There's two issues. One is procuring and distributing vaccines for low-income countries. The other is vaccine hesitancy. And that is a problem, not just in poor countries, but in rich countries, including ours. And I think that's why people like you are so important. You know, you believe in science, you listen to the experts, and you serve as voices in the communities that you're in, you know, to really talk to people about the importance of vaccines, including the COVID vaccine.
Yeah,
And
and that's
last thing,
actually,
sorry,
and
go
that, you know, that's the work that we did at the beginning of COVID, right? To really counter the misinformation that was out there and guide the American public on how to address this, how to mitigate it, how to prevent transmission. And that's the work that you all can continue to do in your communities. That's the work that we'll do through our CFCI learning community. There are many channels that we have to distribute information. We'll continue to do that, as well as to advocate for change. Lisa?
no, I just see that Ethan has asked a question in the chat. Is there a plan to mobilize volunteers in underserved regions of the US for distribution of the vaccines? And I would respond that, you know, there is, but as Anucha mentioned, and Mark, the vaccine hesitancy has to be conquered first. You've also seen, I don't know if you saw today, Dr. Fauci was in the news making it known that one of the chief developers of the vaccine was an African-American woman, and really trying to really debunk long-held concerns and you know, very valid concerns within different segments of America, that where there is mistrust of vaccines. And so that effort has to be linked to, it's not just going to be about, you know, having volunteer presence. From what I understand, there are there's some wonderful organizations working to try to counter that, and a lot of work with Black churches to try to counter that. And you've probably seen also that former presidents and the incoming president have volunteered to also, you know, take the vaccine publicly so that they can reassure people that it's safe. So I don't know specifically about, I know for us, we're not involved with mobilizing volunteers for the distribution of vaccines, but in 92 countries we are, but not here in the US.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lisa and Mark, for your contributions to this question, and thank you, Anucha, for answering it. For everybody in the audience, Lisa is our Senior Advisor for Child Migration and Protection in our global programs at UNICEF USA, and Mark is our Managing Director for Public Policy and Advocacy at UNICEF. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for your questions so far. We will try to get through them. We're also recording them for future opportunities, so stay tuned for that. From Garst, what objections to ending child marriage and ratifying the CRC are we likely to encounter here in the US?
I can't legitimately think of pushback and ending child marriage, so I really can't even answer that, because perhaps there are people that believe that a child, regardless of age, should not be protected, but we actually believe at UNICEF that children under 18 should be protected. They lose out on opportunity to thrive if they're married at such a young age, and we work on that throughout the world. What was the second piece on child rights?
Hold on, let me find it. I kind of lost it towards the end.
Yep.
Let's see, what objections to ending child marriage and ratifying? I think it's just at that, what objections to ending child marriage and ratifying are we likely to encounter here in the US?
Yep. Mark, and have you had pushback? Have you heard pushback that I haven't talked there?
Yeah, thank you. So as with any topic, something that seems really obvious to most of us is not going to be so obvious to some people. So there have been pushback. On the one hand, people who feel like, well, if a girl gets pregnant, she should get married. That's the best thing to do. Not thinking about what happens to that girl's life when she gets married before 18. There's been some questions about military marriages. So what happens if a soldier wants to get married to somebody who's under 17? Shouldn't we allow that? Again, impacts on the girl are not taken into account. And then surprisingly, in some states, we've had some pushback from what we would consider more liberal elements, like the ACLU, for example, in California. There was some concern that by saying girls couldn't get married before 18, you opened the door to saying girls couldn't get birth control before 18. Now, those are completely separate issues, but there was that argument, and it did affect the legislation in California to end child marriage. So, you know, you're going to run into all kinds of crazy things, and you just have to sort of stick to your guns and like, look, you know, there might be some truth to that argument, but the fact is people who get married before 18, 99.9% of the time, it hurts their prospects and their opportunities later in life. CRC and child rights is another longer topic that we can get into. I think the only thing I'll say about that is, at the end of the day, child rights aren't stacked up against anybody else's rights, right? They're not, it's not children against parents. It's not children against adults. It's just saying these kids have rights. All kids have rights. You know, not this kid who lives here, all kids. And we're just trying to build that framework around the country and use that child rights language.
Thanks, Mark.
Yes, absolutely powerful words. Another question from the audience. How do you plan to educate people in America about child rights and be confident that those people will have an impact on this issue?
Well, it's a process. I think first, it's first making sure that, you know, we are fit, all of us as uniters, and are equipped with the right information. And so it's about educating ourselves, right? If you are the frontline troops in your cities and communities across the United States, we want to make sure you're armed with the right information, and we've answered your questions. And then you take it to the streets and you take it to your communities, and you start to talk to individuals and educate them on child rights and the value of child rights and what it's done to enable young people across the globe. And provide you with examples of how children who grow up in a rights respecting environment and the differences that they can make in society. You know, when you think about children like Greta Thunberg, she grew up in a rights respecting environment, right? She knew from a very young age that she had a voice and took that into her own hands. And so when you have data and you have examples of the impact of realizing child rights in different communities, then you have information and you're armed with the right information to move this forward.
All right. And then the last question for tonight. Do you think it's important to prioritize advocacy, fundraising, or a little bit of both?
Well, I think you know, everything that advocacy is also a fundraising engine, right? Because we're advocating to the U.S. government for appropriation for UNICEF resources, right? When we think about people that come to UNICEF, they come for a variety of reasons, but we know at the root of it, they want to impact the lives of children. And if people choose to do that because they have disposable income or because they are interested in doing the development work, that's fantastic. But if individuals are rooted in, I want to advocate, I want to use my agency to advocate on behalf of children around the world, then we welcome them. So you know, we're not choosing one or prioritizing one above the other. We're just inviting young people to be involved in this effort to make sure that every child in this country and across the world realizes their own rights as children.
That's what it's all about. Thank you, Anucha. And thank you for everybody in the audience tonight for being part of the conversation. We are so happy you submitted so many questions. We want you to continue to stay active on the screen, as you'll see some actions to take that were discussed today. And just to let you all know, this webinar will be shared on YouTube, and we want to continue the conversation online.
Yeah, I want to just highlight, you know, text mental health, the one word, to 52886, right? Urge your mayor to put children first in your city. Text CFCI to 52886. Don't forget Advocacy Week, the week of March 22nd through the 26th. Mark your calendars. right? And visit act.unicefusa.org. And then, you know what? You can also take action against and to end child marriage, again at act.unicefusa.org/end child marriage, or text marriage to 52886. And then we invite you to look at our full Unite calendar at unicefusa.org/UNICEF Unite calendar. So thanks for being part of this. I am so grateful for each of you. Really looking forward to educating you and helping and having you educate us on things that matter to you in your own communities. And so we appreciate you. We're grateful for you. Wishing you a safe and healthy holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anucha. Thank you so much, everybody in the audience. Have a good night.